Please don't read the Bible around the kids. It's just not healthy for them." The words hit me like ice water, freezing my fingers over the sacred pages I'd been reading for over 50 years. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe, because this story might help someone draw closer to God's love. Amen. My name is Charlotte Lou Harris, and I am 71 years old. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of what used to feel like my sanctuary, a small guest room in my son David's house in Austin, Texas. The room smelled of lavender sachets I'd tucked into every corner, trying to make this borrowed space feel like home. My arthritic fingers traced the worn leather cover of my Bible, the same one my dear husband Robert had given me on our wedding day 48 years ago. "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths," I whispered, reading Proverbs 3:6 as I did every morning. The golden cross necklace Robert bought me for our 10th anniversary caught the morning light as I bent over the pages, each word a lifeline in an ocean of loneliness I never saw coming. 3 years ago, when my arthritis made climbing the stairs in my old house near impossible, David and his wife Kelly had offered me their guest room. "You'll never be alone, Mom," David had promised, his eyes so sincere, so much like his father's. "We're family. We take care of each other." But this morning felt different. Heavy, like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. I could hear them in the kitchen. Kelly's sharp laugh, David's muffled responses, my grandchildren Emma and little Michael chattering about their day, the sounds of a family living their lives. A family I somehow no longer belonged to, despite sharing their roof. I smoothed my favorite blue cardigan, the one with tiny pearl buttons that Emma used to love counting when she sat on my lap. When was the last time she'd done that? Months? I couldn't remember. These days, when I entered a room, conversation stopped. Eyes avoided mine. I'd become a ghost in my own son's house. My daily routine had become a careful dance of invisibility. Wake at 5:30, before anyone else stirred. Pray. Read scripture. Tidy my small space. Wait. Listen for sounds of life from the kitchen. Count to 100 after the last footstep faded before venturing out to make my simple breakfast, usually just toast and tea, eaten standing at the counter while they slept in on weekends or rushed through their morning routines on weekdays. I pulled my worn cotton robe tighter and picked up my Bible, holding it like the treasure it was. Today was Sunday. Surely today would be different. Surely today they'd remember their promise to never let me worship alone. Walking down the hallway, I passed family photos that no longer included me. Wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, birthday celebrations, all from the past 3 years, all without the grandmother and mother-in-law who lived under the same roof. My absence had been so gradual, so systematic. I wondered if they even noticed when I stopped appearing in their documented memories. The living room was bathed in morning sunlight streaming through windows I'd helped Kelly pick out curtains for last Christmas. I'd spent hours sewing those cream-colored panels by hand, my old sewing machine humming hymns as I worked. Kelly had smiled when I presented them, but I noticed they were never hung. Store-bought blinds appeared instead. I settled into the corner of the sofa, the spot that had somehow become mine without anyone officially declaring it so. The leather was soft beneath my fingers, warmed by the morning sun. I opened my Bible to the bookmark I'd placed in Psalms the night before, my daily reading plan that had sustained me through Robert's cancer, his death, and now this strange exile in my own son's home. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." I began reading softly, my voice barely above a whisper. The familiar words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, each verse a reminder that even in the valley of the shadow of death, or loneliness, I was not alone. That's when Kelly appeared. She moved with the confident stride of a woman who owned every space she entered, her auburn hair perfectly styled even this early in the morning. Her silk pajamas probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She carried herself like someone who'd never known real want, real loss, real desperation for God's presence in the darkest hours. "Good morning, Charlotte," she said, settling into the armchair across from me with a cup of coffee that smelled expensive. Her tone was pleasant enough, but there was something underneath it, something that made my skin prickle with unease. "Good morning, dear." I replied, keeping my finger on the page. Beautiful Sunday morning. I was just doing my devotions before we head to church. Kelly's smile didn't reach her eyes. About that, Charlotte. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee, and I noticed her perfectly manicured nails, red as warning flags. David and I have been talking, and we've decided that maybe church isn't the best fit for our family right now. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I'm sorry, I don't understand, I said, my voice suddenly feeling very small in the large room. Well, you know how it is with kids, Kelly continued, her tone becoming more animated, more rehearsed. They ask so many questions about all that religious stuff. It's confusing for them. We want them to focus on science, on facts, on things they can prove. My Bible suddenly felt heavier in my hands. But Kelly, faith and knowledge can coexist. Jesus himself, please don't read the Bible around the kids, she interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. It's just not healthy for them. The room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock Robert and I had bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. The same clock that had been moved from our home to this one. Its familiar sound now marking time in a space where I was no longer welcome to speak of the God who had carried me through every joy and sorrow. My fingers froze over the pages. The Word of God, my only comfort since Robert passed, my daily bread, my conversation with the Almighty, was now considered dangerous, unhealthy, something to hide from innocent children like a shameful secret. And David, my David, the boy I'd raised in Sunday school, the child who'd once asked me to read him Bible stories every night, the young man who'd promised to love and honor me always, sat in his recliner reading the sports section, silent as stone. David? I whispered, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. Son? He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for just a moment before sliding away like water off glass. Mom, Kelly's right. Times are different now. Kids don't need all that confusion. My faith, the foundation that had held our family together through Robert's deployments, through lean years when David was small, through his father's illness and death, was now confusion. I closed my Bible slowly, reverently, the way one closes a casket. The leather cover was warm from my hands, worn smooth by decades of daily reading, prayer, and tears both joyful and sorrowful. Inside these pages lived every promise God had ever made to me, every comfort he'd whispered in my darkest hours, every truth that had sustained me when the world seemed determined to break me. I see, I said quietly, though I didn't see it all. I didn't understand how love had become shame, how faith had become poison, how the woman who'd given everything to raise this family had become the threat they needed protection from. As I sat there holding my silenced Bible, memories flooded back like pages turning in the wind. How many nights had I spent on my knees beside David's bed when he was little, teaching him to pray? Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep, his small voice echoing mine, his tiny hands folded just the way I'd shown him. When David was 12 and broke his arm falling from Mrs. Patterson's apple tree, I'd held his hand in that hospital waiting room, whispering Psalm 23 until the fear left his eyes. When he graduated high school, I'd given him his grandfather's Bible with a note tucked inside, "For my son, who carries our faith into the future." That same Bible was now gathering dust on a shelf somewhere in this house, forgotten like the woman who'd given it to him. I retreated to my small room, my sanctuary that no longer felt safe. The walls were decorated with photos I'd brought from my old house, images of David's childhood, his wedding day, Robert in his army uniform, our golden anniversary celebration at First Baptist Church of Austin. Each picture told a story of sacrifice wrapped in love. The largest frame held a photo from David's college graduation. I remembered that day so clearly, how I'd worked double shifts at the diner for 2 years to help pay his tuition when his father's veteran benefits weren't enough. My feet had ached every night. My back screamed from carrying heavy trays, but I'd counted every dollar as an investment in my son's future. Education is a gift that can't be taken away, I'd told him, pressing $50 bills into his hands when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd sold my mother's china set, the one she'd saved for 20 years to buy, to help cover his textbooks. When David found out, he'd cried, "Mom, you didn't have to do that." but I had smiled and quoted Philippians 4:19, "And my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." Now that same son sat in silence while his wife forbade me from reading the source of my strength. My arthritis flared as I knelt beside my bed, the way I'd done every morning and evening for 60 years. The hardwood floor was unforgiving against my knees, but I needed this position of humility, this physical reminder that I was speaking to the creator of the universe. "Dear Jesus," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. "I don't understand what's happening. I raised that boy to love you, to honor his mother and father. Where did I go wrong? Was I not faithful enough? Did I fail you somehow?" The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. For weeks now, my prayers had seemed to bounce off the ceiling, as if heaven itself had grown deaf to my cries. I'd always believed that God heard every prayer, but lately, I wondered if I'd somehow been disconnected from his grace. I opened my worn prayer journal, the one I'd kept since David was born. Page after page documented my petitions for my family. Prayers for David's safety when he rode his bike to school, for wisdom when he brought home bad grades, for his future wife to be godly and kind. I'd prayed for Kelly before I'd even met her, asking God to prepare David's heart for the right woman. November 15th, I read from an entry 2 years ago, praying for Kelly to feel welcome in our family. Help me to love her like my own daughter. Give me wisdom to be the mother-in-law she needs. I'd tried so hard. When they'd first married, I'd bitten my tongue when Kelly criticized the way I cooked, the way I cleaned, the way I spoke. "Charlotte, you really should try using less salt. It's not healthy." "Charlotte, that shade of lipstick is a bit much for someone your age." "Charlotte, maybe you could pray a little quieter in the mornings." Each comment had stung, but I'd forced myself to smile. "Love is patient. Love is kind," I'd recited from 1 Corinthians, trying to live out the scripture I'd taught David since childhood. When Emma was born 5 years ago, I'd spent 3 weeks at the hospital and their home, cooking meals, doing laundry, holding the baby while Kelly slept. I'd bought a rocking chair, an expensive one that played lullabies, and placed it in Emma's nursery. "Every baby needs her grandmother's songs," I'd said, settling into that chair for the first of what I'd hoped would be thousands of nighttime feedings. But gradually, my help became interference. My songs became noise. My presence became intrusion. The rocking chair was moved to the garage sale 2 years later. "Emma's outgrown it," Kelly had explained, though I'd seen it listed online for $10, the same chair I'd paid $300 for. Little Michael's birth 3 years ago had been different. Kelly's mother, Patricia, had flown in from California and taken over. Suddenly, there were rules about visiting hours, about who could hold the baby, about what topics were appropriate for discussion. "We want to keep things calm and positive," Patricia had announced, giving me a look that suggested my very presence was neither. I'd brought a handmade quilt for Michael's crib, the same pattern I'd sewn for David 34 years earlier. It had taken me 3 months to complete, every stitch a prayer for the baby's health and happiness. Kelly had thanked me politely, but I'd later found it in the donation bag heading to Goodwill. "It doesn't match the nursery theme," she'd explained when I'd asked. Standing up from my knees, each joint protesting the movement, I walked to my dresser and pulled out the bottom drawer. Hidden beneath my winter sweaters was a small wooden box Robert had made for me in his woodworking shop. Inside were letters, dozens of them, that I'd written but never sent. I pulled out one from 6 months ago. "Dear David, I miss you. I know we live in the same house, but I miss the son who used to call me just to hear my voice, who brought me flowers on Mother's Day not because he had to, but because he wanted to. I miss the man who once said I was his hero. I'm still here, still your mother, still praying for you every day. When did I become invisible to you? When did my love become a burden? I'm trying to understand, but my heart is breaking a little more each day. Love always, Mom." Another from last month. "Dearest Jesus, I'm so tired. Tired of walking on eggshells in my own son's house. Tired of pretending it doesn't hurt when they make plans without including me. Tired of eating dinner alone while they laugh together in the next room. Is this what you want for me? Have I served my purpose? Sometimes I wonder if they'd be happier if I just disappeared. But then I remember you have plans for me, plans to prosper me and not to harm me. Help me to trust in that promise. The most recent letter, written just last week, was addressed to Kelly. Dear Kelly, I know you don't like me very much, and I'm sorry for whatever I've done to earn your disapproval. I've tried to be the mother-in-law you needed, but I feel like I'm failing. All I want is to love my family, to be part of my grandchildren's lives, to share the faith that has sustained me through every trial. But I see now that my presence causes you stress, and that was never my intention. I'm praying for wisdom about what to do next. Please know that despite everything, I love you and want what's best for our family. I'd never found the courage to send any of these letters. They remained my secret conversations with the void where my family's love used to live. The sound of laughter drifted up from downstairs, Emma and Michael playing some game while their parents encouraged them. Once, I would have been part of that laughter. Once, I would have been the grandmother who played hide and seek, who read bedtime stories, who baked cookies shaped like stars and hearts. Now I was the woman they had to hide God from. I thought about Robert, how he'd have handled this situation. He'd always been the wise one, the steady presence who could navigate family storms with grace and firmness. Charlotte, he'd say in that calm voice of his, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step back and let people find their own way to God. But how do you step back from your own family? How do you love from a distance when distance feels like death? Evening came too quickly. I heard them preparing dinner downstairs, the clatter of dishes, the microwave beeping, the children's excited chatter about their day. No one called my name. No one knocked on my door. No one remembered that the woman upstairs might be hungry too. I made myself a peanut butter sandwich and ate it sitting on my bed, staring at the family photos that no longer included me. In the distance, I could hear them saying grace before their meal, the same prayer I'd taught David when he was Emma's age. The irony wasn't lost on me. They could pray over their food, but I couldn't read my Bible in their presence. As darkness fell over Austin, I knelt once more beside my bed, my knees finding the familiar grooves they'd worn in the carpet. Lord, I whispered, I feel like Job tonight. Everything I've built, everything I've loved, seems to be slipping away. But like Job, I will not curse you. I will not turn away from your love. Please, if you're listening, show me what you want me to do. Show me how to love my family even when they no longer want my love. The house grew quiet below me. One by one, the lights went out. My family, the people I'd given my life to serve, settled into their beds without a single thought for the woman whose heart was breaking just one floor above them. But I wasn't truly alone. My Bible lay open beside me to Psalm 27:10. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Even if my own son had forgotten me, my heavenly Father never would. The weeks that followed Kelly's declaration felt like living in a glass cage, visible but untouchable, present but unwelcome. I began to notice things I'd previously overlooked, small cruelties disguised as casual indifference. My 71st birthday came and went without acknowledgement. I sat in my room that morning, waiting for someone to remember, checking my phone for messages that never came. By evening, when David walked past my door without even glancing in, I understood that I'd become as forgettable as yesterday's newspaper. That same week, I developed a terrible cold that settled deep in my chest. I spent 3 days barely able to speak, coughing fits that shook my entire frame. The house continued its normal rhythm around me. Lunches packed, children dressed for school, parents rushing off to work, while I lay in bed wondering if anyone would notice if I simply didn't wake up one morning. On the 4th day, weak and shaky, I made my way to the kitchen for water. Kelly was there, preparing her elaborate smoothie, and glanced at me with mild annoyance. "You sound terrible," she said, not pausing in her routine. "Maybe you should see a doctor." No offer to drive me. No concern in her voice. No acknowledgement that I didn't have a car or the money for a taxi to the clinic. I walked 8 blocks that day to the urgent care center, my chest burning with each step, my pride the only thing keeping me upright. The nurse who checked me in looked alarmed. "Ma'am, do you have someone who can pick you up? You shouldn't be walking home in this condition." "I'll be fine," I lied, because admitting I had no one felt worse than the infection in my lungs. Sunday mornings became exercises in spiritual starvation. I'd dress carefully in my best dress, the navy blue one with tiny white flowers that Robert had always complimented, and sit on the edge of my bed, waiting, hoping, praying that today would be different, that today my family would remember their faith. But David would emerge from his room in golf clothes, Kelly in yoga attire, the children in casual play clothes. "We're going to the park," became their Sunday routine, deliberately scheduled during church hours. They'd invite the children to wave goodbye to Grandma Charlotte as they loaded into their SUV, a performance of familial affection for the neighbors' benefit. I started walking to First Baptist alone, a 40-minute journey that left my feet swollen and my spirit questioning everything I'd believed about family loyalty. The church members were kind but distant. They'd known me as Robert's wife, David's mother, half of a couple that had served faithfully for decades. Now I was just the elderly woman who sat alone in the back pew, whose son never visited, whose family had clearly moved on to more important things. Pastor Williams would nod politely when he saw me, but I could see the questions in his eyes. Where was David? Where was my family? The unspoken assumption was that something must be wrong with me, that faithful families didn't simply abandon their matriarchs without cause. One particularly painful evening, I overheard Kelly on the phone with her sister in California. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice carried through the thin walls as I passed the kitchen. "Oh, Charlotte? Well, you know how some older people get. Very set in her ways. Obsessed with that religion stuff. David says she was always like that, but it's gotten worse since his dad died. She's constantly reading that book, muttering prayers. It makes the kids uncomfortable. That book. As if the Bible were some dangerous tome instead of the foundation of Western civilization. We're thinking it might be time for her to transition to a more appropriate living situation, somewhere with people her own age who share her interests." My hands trembled as I pressed myself against the hallway wall, feeling like an intruder in my own life. They were discussing my future as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. The next morning, I found a brochure on my nightstand. Sunset Gardens Christian Retirement Community. The glossy photos showed elderly people playing bingo, attending craft classes, sitting in circle for what appeared to be supervised Bible study. The message was clear. This was where women like me belonged, segregated with others who'd outlived their usefulness to their families. I turned the brochure over and read the monthly cost. $3,000, more than double my Social Security check. Money I didn't have for a place I didn't want to go. That afternoon, while they were out at Emma's soccer practice, I did something I'd never done before. I went through David's desk. I told myself I was looking for financial information, trying to understand how I might afford their proposed solution. But what I found made my blood run cold. Hidden in a folder labeled Mom's Transition, I discovered they'd been planning my removal for months. There were printouts of retirement homes, notes about selling my possessions, even a draft of a letter to my former neighbors explaining that I'd chosen to move to a facility better suited to my needs. But the most devastating discovery was a copy of the house deed. David's name was listed as the primary owner. But below it, in smaller print, was a section I'd never seen before. Joint ownership with survivorship rights, Charlotte Louise Harris. My heart nearly stopped. When Robert had added David to the deed 5 years ago during his illness, it was supposed to make things easier if something happened to both of us. But the legal language clearly indicated that I had equal ownership rights. This house, the house they were planning to remove me from, was legally mine as much as it was David's. They either didn't know, or they were hoping I didn't know. I photographed the document with my old flip phone and carefully returned everything to its place, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and something I hadn't felt in months. Power. That evening at dinner, if you could call eating a sandwich alone in my room while listening to their family conversation downstairs dinner, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. I called Thomas Wells. Thomas had been Robert's best friend since their army days, the man who'd stood as best man at our wedding and godfather to David. He'd become a lawyer after his service, specializing in elder law and estate planning. If anyone would tell me the truth about my situation, it would be Thomas. "Charlotte?" His voice carried surprise and warmth when he answered. Honey, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? The simple kindness in his voice nearly broke me. Thomas, I need help. Legal help. I think I'm in trouble. We talked for an hour. I told him everything. The isolation, the retirement home pressure, the financial situation, the deed I'd found. Thomas listened without judgment, asking careful questions that revealed the sharp legal mind that had made him successful. Charlotte, he said finally, you need to come to my office. Tomorrow, if possible. Bring that deed and any other documents you can find. Don't tell David or Kelly you're coming. Am I being paranoid? I asked, suddenly doubting everything. Honey, after 40 years of practicing law, I can tell you that the most vulnerable people are often the ones who trust family members completely. You're not paranoid. You're protecting yourself. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, alternating between terror and something that felt surprisingly like hope. For months, I'd been accepting their treatment as somehow deserved, as if my age and dependence had forfeited my right to dignity and respect. But the deed changed everything. I wasn't just a burden they were graciously housing. I was a homeowner being manipulated by people who should have been protecting me. The next morning, I told them I had a doctor's appointment and would take a taxi. Kelly barely looked up from her phone. Make sure you're back by 3. I have book club here and I don't want... She trailed off, but the implication was clear. She didn't want me visible when her friends came over. Thomas's office was in downtown Austin, in one of those old buildings that suggested permanence and trustworthiness. The elevator creaked as it carried me to the 5th floor, and I found myself whispering the 23rd Psalm under my breath for courage. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. When Thomas opened his office door, I saw Robert in his face. The same kind eyes, the same solid presence that had always made me feel safe. He hugged me like family, and for the first time in months, I felt like I mattered to someone. Let's see what we're dealing with, he said, settling behind his massive oak desk as I pulled out the photographs I'd taken. He studied the deed for a long time, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Finally, he looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Charlotte, they can't force you to leave. Not legally. This house is as much yours as it is David's. And according to Texas law, your homestead rights are protected. The words hit me like a thunderclap. I mean you have options. More options than they want you to know about. For the first time in months, I felt something other than helplessness. But I also felt terrified. Thomas, I whispered, what if this destroys what's left of my relationship with David? He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Charlotte, honey, what relationship? From what you've told me, they're already treating you like you don't exist. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people to treat you badly. As I left his office that afternoon, carrying copies of documents that proved my legal rights, I felt like I was carrying dynamite. The question was, did I have the courage to light the fuse? I thought about Jesus, how he'd overturned the tables in the temple when people were being mistreated. Sometimes love required action, not just patience. Am I being tested or just forgotten? I whispered to the sky as I waited for my taxi home. The answer, I was beginning to realize, was that maybe it didn't matter. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for God to change my circumstances and start trusting Him to give me the strength to change them myself. When I returned from Thomas's office that afternoon, the house felt different. Or maybe I felt different. The same beige walls, the same family photos that excluded me, the same suffocating silence. But now I walked through it all with a secret burning in my chest like a coal from the altar. I had rights, legal rights, rights they didn't want me to know about. Kelly was in the kitchen preparing for her book club, arranging expensive cheese and wine on platters with the precision of someone hosting a magazine photo shoot. She glanced at me with that familiar look of mild irritation. How was your appointment? She asked. Not because she cared, but because appearances mattered to Kelly. A good daughter-in-law would ask. Fine, I replied, my voice steadier than it had been in months. Just fine. Something in my tone made her look at me more carefully, but I was already walking toward my room, clutching my purse where copies of legal documents lay hidden like weapons I wasn't sure I had the courage to use. That evening, David finally knocked on my door. It was the first time he'd initiated conversation with me in weeks. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened the door to find my son standing there with an expression I couldn't quite read. Guilt mixed with determination. Love tangled up with something that looked suspiciously like resignation. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." He sat heavily on my small chair while I perched on the edge of my bed, the way we used to talk when he was young and troubled by playground bullies or failed math tests. But this felt different. Final. "Mom, Kelly and I have been talking and we think—" He paused, running his hands through his hair the way he'd done as a teenager when he was about to disappoint me. "We think it might be time for you to consider other living arrangements." The words hung between us like a death sentence dressed up as a suggestion. "Other arrangements," I repeated quietly. "There's this place, Sunset Gardens. It's really nice, Mom. They have activities. People your age, Bible studies." His voice trailed off as he realized what he'd just said. Bible studies were acceptable there, with other old people, safely contained away from his children. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you remember when you were 8 and had pneumonia? I slept in a chair beside your bed for 6 nights because you were afraid to close your eyes. Do you remember what I whispered to you when the fever broke?" His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't answer. I said, "Mommy will always take care of you no matter what. Always, David, no matter what. Mom, this isn't about love. It's about what's best for everyone. You'd be happier with people who understand." "Understand what? That I'm an embarrassment? That my faith is toxic? That the woman who gave birth to you, who sacrificed everything for your future, is now too dangerous to be around your children? It's not like that. Then what is it like?" For the first time in months, anger crept into my voice. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've decided I'm a problem to be solved rather than a mother to be loved." David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. Kelly's parents think we're crazy for letting you stay this long. Her mother keeps asking why we're supporting someone who isn't even blood-related." Not blood-related. The words hit me like a physical blow. "David, I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I walked the floors with you when you had colic. I taught you to ride a bike, helped you with homework, held you when your heart was broken. How can I not be blood-related? You know what I mean. You're not Kelly's family, and this is Kelly's house too." "Actually," I said quietly, "it's my house too." Something in my tone made him turn around. "What do you mean?" I could have told him then about the deed, about my legal rights, about the consultation with Thomas. But looking at my son, really looking at him, I saw something that stopped me cold. Relief. He wanted me to leave. This conversation wasn't about finding the best solution for an impossible situation. It was about getting rid of a burden he no longer wanted to carry. "Nothing," I said finally. "Never mind." He studied my face for a long moment, then sighed. "Mom, we've already put a deposit down at Sunset Gardens. They have an opening next month. It's a good place, I promise." Next month. They'd been planning this without consulting me, making decisions about my future as if I were a piece of furniture to be relocated. And if I say no? David's silence was answer enough. After he left, I sat in the darkness of my room listening to Kelly's book club through the thin walls. Laughter, animated conversation, the clink of wine glasses, sounds of women enjoying themselves, building friendships, creating community. None of them knew the elderly woman upstairs existed. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. I was in the kitchen making my usual solitary breakfast when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Harris? This is Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services." My blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, what?" "We received a report about potential neglect involving minors in your household. Could we schedule a time to come by and speak with everyone?" The world tilted sideways. "Neglect? I don't understand. What kind of report?" "Someone called in concerns about inappropriate religious exposure, potential emotional manipulation of children. We're required to investigate all reports. Would tomorrow afternoon work?" I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Someone had called Child Protective Services on me. Someone had suggested that my presence was harmful to Emma and Michael. But who? The answer came that evening when Kelly's mother, Patricia, arrived unannounced from California. I heard her voice before I saw her, that sharp, authoritative tone that could cut glass. "Where is she?" Patricia demanded as soon as she walked through the front door. "Upstairs," Kelly replied. "But Mom, maybe we should—" "No, this has gone on long enough. David, Kelly, you've been too kind. That woman is manipulating those children with her religious nonsense, and it's going to damage them permanently." I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart pounding as I listened to them discuss me like I was a disease they needed to cure. "I called CPS," Patricia announced proudly. "Someone has to protect Emma and Michael from her influence. Children shouldn't be exposed to that level of religious fanaticism. It's emotional abuse, plain and simple." "Mom, you called CPS?" David's voice carried shock. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. That woman sits around all day reading that book, muttering prayers, filling those children's heads with guilt and fear. They're going to grow up thinking they're sinners who need saving. It's psychological manipulation. Kelly's voice was quieter, but equally firm. "She's right, David. Your mother's obsession with religion isn't healthy. The kids ask questions we don't know how to answer." Emma came home from Sunday school, before we stopped going, talking about hell and judgment. A 6-year-old shouldn't be worrying about damnation. I sank to the floor at the top of the stairs, my legs too weak to support me. They weren't just asking me to leave. They were painting me as a child abuser, a religious fanatic, a threat to my own grandchildren's well-being. She's not dangerous," David said weakly. "She's just old-fashioned." "Old-fashioned?" Patricia's voice rose. "David, wake up. Your mother represents everything that's wrong with organized religion. The guilt, the judgment, the fear-mongering. Do you want your children growing up thinking they're inherently evil? Do you want them to be afraid of a vengeful God who's watching their every move?" "She's not like that," David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Have you listened to her prayers?" "I have. She prays for your souls like you're lost sinners. She looks at Kelly like she's not good enough because she doesn't share her beliefs. That kind of religious superiority is toxic, and I won't stand by while it poisons my grandchildren." My grandchildren. The words cut deep because Patricia was claiming them in a way that excluded me entirely. "The CPS visit is just a formality," Patricia continued. "Once they see the situation, they'll recommend that she be removed for the children's safety. Problem solved." I crawled back to my room on my hands and knees, too devastated to stand. This wasn't just about making me leave anymore. This was about destroying my reputation, painting me as unfit to be around children, ensuring that even if I stayed, I'd never be allowed near Emma and Michael again. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I'd never experienced before: righteous anger. Not the bitter resentment of someone who felt sorry for herself, but the clean, burning fury of someone who'd been slandered and falsely accused. They could ask me to leave. They could treat me like a burden. But they could not. They would not paint me as a danger to children I loved more than my own life. I reached for my phone and called Thomas. "Charlotte? What's wrong?" "They called Child Protective Services on me. They're telling people I'm emotionally abusing my grandchildren with religion." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of my heart breaking and reforming into something harder, something that wouldn't break so easily again. "Charlotte," Thomas said finally, his voice deadly serious. "We need to meet. Tonight, if possible. This changes everything." "How?" "Because now it's not just about your housing situation. Now it's about your reputation, your character, your right to have a relationship with your grandchildren. And, honey, I'm not going to let them destroy you like this." As I hung up the phone, I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror. The woman staring back at me was tired, hurt, and scared. But she was not defeated. "Would Jesus forgive this too?" I whispered to my reflection. "Should I forgive again?" Then, louder, with conviction that surprised me, "Jesus overturned tables when people were being mistreated in his house. Maybe it's time I learned to overturn a few tables myself." For the first time in months, I felt like I was waking up from a long, terrible dream, and I was angry enough to fight back. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I prayed with fire in my heart instead of defeat in my voice. Lord, I whispered, kneeling beside my bed with more strength than I'd felt in ages. I've been patient. I've been meek. I've turned the other cheek until my face is raw from slapping. But they're attacking my character now, calling my faith dangerous, trying to separate me from children I love. Give me wisdom. Give me courage. And if this battle is righteous, give me victory. I felt something shift inside me, like tumblers clicking into place in a lock that had been jammed for too long. The next morning, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Instead of hiding in my room until they left for work, I walked downstairs and began cooking breakfast. Real breakfast. Bacon, eggs, pancakes from scratch, the kind of meal I used to make when this was still my family. Kelly emerged first, dressed for her yoga class, and stopped short when she saw me at the stove. "What are you doing?" "Making breakfast for my family," I replied calmly, not turning around. "Something I haven't done in far too long." "Charlotte, we don't really have time. Then you can eat it tomorrow." I flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "Or the next day. I'll keep making it until someone sits down to eat with me." David appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, his expression wary. "Mom, what's this about?" "It's about remembering who I am," I said, finally turning to face them both. "I'm not just the woman you're planning to ship off to Sunset Gardens. I'm not the religious fanatic your mother-in-law thinks is poisoning your children. I'm Charlotte Louise Harris. I'm your mother, David. I'm Emma and Michael's grandmother, and I'm done apologizing for existing." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sizzle of bacon in the pan. "Emma! Michael!" I called toward the stairs. "Grandma's making breakfast!" "Charlotte, don't!" Kelly started, but the children were already thundering down the stairs, their faces lighting up when they saw the feast spread across the counter. "Grandma, Charlotte!" Emma threw her arms around my waist. "You made pancakes. Mommy never makes pancakes." Kelly's face flushed red, but before she could speak, I knelt down to Emma's level. "Sweetheart, would you like to help Grandma say grace before we eat?" The room went deadly quiet. Kelly stepped forward, her mouth opening to protest. But I held up my hand. "It's my kitchen too, Kelly. And these are my grandchildren too. And if you have a problem with a grandmother teaching her grandchildren to be grateful for their food, then maybe the problem isn't with me." David looked like he'd been slapped. Kelly's face cycled through several emotions before settling on cold fury, but Emma was already folding her small hands. "What do I say, Grandma? Just thank God for the food and for the people we love," I said softly, my eyes never leaving Kelly's face. "Dear God," Emma began in her sweet 6-year-old voice, "thank you for pancakes and for Grandma Charlotte and for—" She paused, thinking hard. "And for making today not sad. Not sad." My heart nearly broke. Had this child noticed the sadness that had been hanging over our house like a storm cloud? Little Michael, not to be outdone by his sister, added his own prayer. "And thank you for bacon. Amen." We ate breakfast together for the first time in months. David sat stiffly, checking his phone repeatedly. Kelly pushed food around her plate without eating, but Emma and Michael chattered away, asking me about everything from why pancakes were round to whether God liked chocolate chips. As David and Kelly prepared to leave for work, David pulled me aside. "Mom, what you did this morning?" Kelly's upset. "I made breakfast for my grandchildren, in my own kitchen. If that upsets your wife, then maybe she needs to examine why a grandmother loving her grandchildren feels threatening to her. That's not— You can't just—" He struggled for words. "Things have changed, Mom. You can't go back to the way things were." "You're right," I said calmly. "I can't go back. I can only go forward. And going forward, I'm going to stop pretending I don't live here. I'm going to stop hiding from my own family. And I'm going to stop letting people treat me like I'm already dead." After they left, I called Thomas and arranged to meet him that afternoon. But first, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Margaret from church. Margaret Hayes had been my prayer partner for over 20 years. We'd weathered marriages, child-rearing, deaths, and everything in between together. But after Robert died and I moved in with David, I'd gradually lost touch with everyone from my old life. Depression and isolation have a way of making you forget you ever had friends. "Charlotte? Oh my Lord, honey, where have you been?" I've been worried sick. Her voice was like warm sunshine, and I realized how starved I'd been for genuine affection. I've been lost, Margaret. But I think I'm finding my way back. We talked for an hour. I told her everything. The isolation, the retirement home pressure, the CPS call, the whole devastating story. Margaret listened with the wisdom of someone who'd lived through her own share of family drama. "Honey," she said when I finished, "what you're describing isn't love. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't shame. Love doesn't try to separate you from your faith. That's something else entirely. But they're my family. Family is supposed to be your safe place, not your battlefield. And Charlotte, listen to me carefully. There's nothing wrong with your faith. There's nothing dangerous about reading your Bible. There's nothing inappropriate about teaching children to pray. Anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to control you, not protect those children." That afternoon, Thomas's office felt like a war room. He'd prepared documents, made phone calls, and researched precedents. When I walked in, his expression was grim but determined. "Charlotte, we need to talk about what you want to accomplish here, because I can help you. But you need to decide how far you're willing to go." "What do you mean?" "I mean you have legal options, powerful ones, but using them will change your relationship with David permanently. There's no going back once we start down this road." I thought about Emma's prayer that morning, for making today not sad. I thought about Michael's innocent joy over bacon and pancakes. I thought about David's silence when Kelly forbade me from reading my Bible. "Thomas, if I do nothing, they're going to put me in a home I can't afford and paint me as an unfit grandmother. They're going to tell the world that my faith makes me dangerous to children. Is that the legacy I want to leave? Absolutely not. Then tell me my options." Thomas opened a thick folder and spread documents across his desk. "First, you're a joint owner of that house. They cannot force you to leave. If they try, it's illegal eviction, and we can stop it immediately." Relief flooded through me. "What else? The CPS investigation? It's going to fail. I've spoken to the caseworker. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing. And frankly, calling religious education emotional abuse is a non-starter unless there's actual documented harm, which there isn't. And Patricia? Can she keep making these accusations?" Thomas's smile was sharp as a blade. "Patricia Brennan made several statements to CPS that could be considered defamatory. If she continues spreading false accusations about your character, we can pursue legal action for slander." I felt power flowing back into my body like blood returning to a sleeping limb. "But Charlotte," Thomas continued, "there's something else we need to discuss. The house. What about it? If David and Kelly want you out so badly that they're willing to lie to government agencies and destroy your reputation, then maybe it's time to consider other options." "I don't understand." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "You own half that house. If you wanted to, you could force a sale and take your equity. That's probably close to $200,000, Charlotte. Enough to buy your own place, live independently, and never have to depend on people who clearly don't want you there." The idea hit me like lightning. My own place. My own home where I could read my Bible in the living room if I wanted to. Where I could pray out loud. Where I could invite my grandchildren to visit me instead of begging for scraps of their attention in someone else's house. Is that really possible? More than possible. Given their behavior, I think a judge would be very sympathetic to forcing a sale, especially with the CPS call in the record. I left Thomas's office with my head spinning and my heart pounding. For the first time in months, I had options. Real options. The power to change my circumstances instead of just enduring them. But first, I was going to give my family one last chance to remember who I was and what I meant to them. That evening, I made dinner. Not just any dinner, David's favorite pot roast with all the trimmings, the meal I used to make for his birthday every year when he was growing up. I set the table with the good china, lit candles, and waited. When they came home, the smell of home-cooked food filled the air. Emma and Michael ran to the kitchen immediately. "Grandma, it smells like heaven!" David appeared in the doorway, his expression softening despite himself. "Mom, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," I said firmly. "I need to talk to all of you, as a family, tonight." Kelly emerged from the hallway, her face already set in disapproving lines. "Charlotte, if this is about this morning, it's about a lot of things. But mostly, it's about deciding what kind of family we're going to be going forward." I served the meal in silence, noting how David's eyes closed in pleasure at the first bite, how even Kelly couldn't hide her appreciation for food that hadn't come from a restaurant or a microwave. When everyone's plates were full, I stood up. "I have something to say, and I need you all to listen without interrupting." The dining room fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock. 3 months ago, Kelly told me not to read my Bible in front of the children. Yesterday, I found out someone called Child Protective Services, claiming I was emotionally abusing Emma and Michael with my faith. David started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I also know that you've put a deposit down at Sunset Gardens without consulting me, that you've been planning my removal for months, that you've discussed selling my possessions and explaining to the neighbors that I chose to leave." Kelly's fork clattered against her plate. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "Tomorrow, you're going to call Sunset Gardens and get our money back. You're going to stop treating me like a problem to be solved and start treating me like the woman who gave birth to you and raised you to be better than this." "Mom," David started. "I'm not done." My voice carried an authority I'd forgotten I possessed. "I'm going to continue living in this house, which, by the way, legally belongs to me as much as it does to you. I'm going to continue loving my grandchildren and sharing my faith with them if they want to hear it. And if anyone has a problem with that—" I paused, looking directly at Kelly, then at David. "Then maybe they need to decide if they'd rather have a grandmother who loves them or no grandmother at all." The silence that followed was deafening. But for the first time in months, it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of someone who'd finally remembered how to fight. The silence stretched across the dining room like a taut wire, ready to snap. David stared at his plate, his jaw working as if he were chewing words he couldn't swallow. Kelly's face had gone pale, then flushed red, cycling through emotions like a broken traffic light. Finally, Kelly stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You can't just dictate terms to us in our own home." "Our home," I corrected quietly. "And yes, I can. I should have done it months ago." "Mom," David said, his voice strained, "you're putting us in an impossible position. Kelly's family thinks—" "I don't care what Kelly's family thinks," I interrupted, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. "I care what my family thinks. I care whether my son remembers that he once promised to honor his mother and father. I care whether my grandchildren will grow up knowing that faith isn't something to be ashamed of." Kelly threw her napkin down on the table. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The guilt trips, the manipulation, the constant references to religion and obligation. This is why we can't—" "Kelly," my voice cut through her rant like a blade. "Stop. Just stop." Something in my tone made her freeze mid-sentence. "For 3 years, I have bent over backward to accommodate you. I've made myself invisible so you could feel comfortable. I've swallowed my words, hidden my faith, and accepted scraps of affection from my own family. But I will not sit here and be called manipulative for asking to be treated with basic human dignity." I stood up, and somehow, even at 5'4", I felt taller than I had in months. "David, I raised you to be a man of integrity, a man who stands up for what's right, especially when it's difficult. Right now, your wife's mother has accused me of child abuse to government authorities. She's trying to destroy my reputation and separate me from my grandchildren. And you're sitting there worried about putting Kelly in an impossible position?" David's face crumpled. "Mom, I never wanted—" "Then fix it," I said simply. "Call Patricia right now and tell her to stop spreading lies about me. Call CPS and tell them the truth, that I'm a loving grandmother whose only crime is reading the Bible in my own home. Cancel whatever deposit you put down at Sunset Gardens and apologize for making plans for my life without consulting me." "You're asking us to choose sides," Kelly said, her voice shaking. "No," I replied, moving around the table to stand directly in front of her. "I'm asking you to choose decency, to choose truth, to choose the kind of family that protects each other instead of throwing each other away when things get inconvenient." Emma, who had been sitting quietly throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up in her small, clear voice. "Why is everyone angry? Grandma Charlotte just made dinner." The innocence in her question hit the room like a physical blow. Here we were, adults fighting over power and control and hurt feelings, while a 6-year-old could see the simple truth. I had made dinner for people I loved. Kelly looked at her daughter, then at me, and something shifted in her expression. "Emma, Michael, go upstairs and get ready for bed," she said quietly. "But Grandma made dessert," Michael protested. "We'll save it for tomorrow," I said, kneeling down to hug both children. "Grandma promises." After the children reluctantly headed upstairs, Kelly sank back into her chair and put her head in her hands. "This is such a mess," she whispered. For the first time in our conversation, I heard vulnerability instead of hostility in her voice. "It doesn't have to be," I said gently, sitting back down across from her. "Kelly, I know we've never been close. I know you think I'm old-fashioned and intrusive, but I'm not your enemy. I never was." She looked up at me with eyes that were suspiciously bright. "My mother says, she says religious people like you are judgmental, that you think people like me aren't good enough. People like you? People who don't go to church. People who question things. People who want their children to make their own choices about faith instead of having it forced on them." I studied Kelly's face, seeing past the defensiveness to something deeper, fear. She was afraid of me. Afraid of what I represented. Afraid that somehow my faith would contaminate her children or make them judge her choices. "Kelly," I said softly, "in all the time I've lived here, have I ever once criticized your choices? Have I ever told you that you're not good enough? Have I ever forced my beliefs on Emma and Michael?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No," she admitted finally. "I read my Bible because it brings me comfort. I pray because it's how I talk to God. I wanted to share those things with my grandchildren because they're part of who I am. But I never wanted to force them on anyone." David had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Mom, Kelly's not wrong about Patricia. She thinks you're trying to influence the kids in ways we don't want." "And what do you think, David?" I asked. "Do you think I'm trying to harm your children?" He met my eyes for the first time all evening. No, I don't. But Patricia has resources, connections. She could make things very difficult for us if we don't handle this her way." I felt my heart break a little. "So you're more afraid of disappointing Kelly's mother than you are of losing your own mother? That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, for 3 years I've lived in this house like a ghost. I've watched my grandchildren grow up from a distance. I've pretended my faith doesn't exist so Kelly would feel comfortable. I've accepted being forgotten on birthdays, ignored when I'm sick, excluded from family activities. And now, when I finally ask to be treated like I matter, you're worried about being fair?" The room fell silent again, but this time, the silence felt different, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. Kelly was the first to speak. "What do you want from us, Charlotte?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything that had gone wrong between us. "I want to matter," I said simply. "I want to be included in my grandchildren's lives. I want to be able to read my Bible in the living room without being told I'm damaging innocent minds. I want my son to remember that loving your mother isn't a burden, it's a blessing." "And if we can't give you that?" David asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. I thought about Thomas's words that afternoon, about the house deed, about $200,000, and the freedom to start over somewhere else, about the possibility of walking away from people who clearly didn't want me and building a life where I was valued. "Then I'll make other arrangements," I said finally. "Arrangements that don't involve Sunset Gardens or depending on people who see me as a burden." Something in my tone must have alerted David to the fact that I wasn't just making empty threats. "What kind of arrangements?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the grateful little boy I'd sacrificed everything for, but a middle-aged man who'd grown comfortable with taking from me while giving nothing back. "The kind that would give me my own home, my own life, and my own dignity," I said. "The kind that would allow me to be the grandmother I want to be, even if it's not in this house." Kelly's head snapped up. You're talking about moving out? I'm talking about taking control of my own life instead of letting other people make decisions about it. But the house, David started. The house that I co-own? I asked sweetly. The house that Robert left to both of us? That house? The color drained from David's face. You wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Wouldn't exercise my legal rights? Wouldn't protect myself from people who've spent months trying to get rid of me? Wouldn't choose dignity over degradation? I stood up and began clearing the dinner dishes, my movements calm and purposeful. I'm going to give you all 1 week to think about what kind of family you want to be, I said, not looking at either of them. 1 week to decide whether you'd rather work with me or lose me entirely. Because those are your options now. Mom, you can't be serious about what? About refusing to be treated like garbage by my own family? About insisting that my faith isn't a disease that needs to be quarantined? About wanting to be loved instead of tolerated? I paused in my dish clearing and looked directly at David. Son, I love you more than my own life. I always have. But I won't spend whatever years I have left begging for scraps of affection from people who should be grateful to have me. I won't hide who I am to make other people comfortable. And I won't let anyone, paint me as dangerous to children I would die to protect. Kelly and David sat in stunned silence as I finished clearing the table. Think about it, I said as I headed toward the kitchen. But don't think too long, because for the first time in 3 years I have options, and I'm not afraid to use them. As I washed dishes, I could hear them whispering urgently in the dining room. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Panic mixed with disbelief. Good, I thought, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. Let them panic. Let them realize that the woman they'd been taking for granted had more strength left than they'd imagined. For too long, I'd operated from a position of weakness, begging for love from people who seemed determined to withhold it. But Thomas had shown me something powerful that afternoon. I wasn't helpless. I had rights. I had options. I had value. Most importantly, I had a God who didn't require me to diminish myself to earn his love. I forgive you, I whispered as I dried the last dish, but I won't enable you anymore. It was time to find out whether my family loved me enough to fight for me, or whether I was strong enough to build a life without them. The week that followed felt like watching a family slowly wake up from a long, troubled sleep. Change came in small waves, tentative at first, then with gathering momentum. The first surprise came Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my Bible open to Psalms, reading aloud in my normal voice instead of the whisper I'd grown accustomed to, when Kelly appeared in the doorway. She hesitated for a moment, then poured herself coffee and sat down across from me. "What are you reading?" she asked quietly. I looked up, searching her face for sarcasm or hostility, but found only genuine curiosity. "Psalm 27, I replied cautiously. "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." Kelly winced slightly. That seems appropriate. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the morning light streaming through windows that no longer felt like prison bars. "Charlotte," Kelly said finally, "I called my mother yesterday." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Oh?" I told her to stop calling CPS. I told her that what happened in our house wasn't her business, and that if she continued making accusations against you, she wouldn't be welcome here anymore. The words hit me like a physical relief, tension I didn't know I'd been carrying flowing out of my shoulders. "How did she take that?" Kelly's smile was rueful. "About as well as you'd expect. She accused me of being brainwashed by religious manipulation. She threatened to cut off her financial support for the kids' college funds." "Oh, Kelly, I never wanted—" "I know," she interrupted gently, "and that's what I told her. I said that in 3 years of living with you, you've never once tried to force your beliefs on anyone. You've never criticized my choices or made me feel judged. The only person doing any manipulating was her." I felt tears prick my eyes. That must have been difficult. It was. But you know what was more difficult? Watching my children walk on eggshells around their own grandmother. Watching Emma ask me why you looked so sad all the time. Watching Michael save his dessert to bring up to your room because he thought you might be hungry. The image of little Michael with his generous heart Secretly saving food for me nearly broke my composure entirely. I didn't know he was doing that. He's been doing it for months. Every time we had something special, ice cream, cookies, cake, he'd sneak some upstairs to you. When I asked him why, he said, "Grandma Charlotte looks hungry, but not for food." Out of the mouths of babes. A 3-year-old had seen what the adults in the family had chosen to ignore. That afternoon brought another breakthrough. David came home from work early and found me in the living room, reading my Bible with Emma curled up beside me. Instead of the tension I'd grown to expect, his face showed something I hadn't seen in months. Peace. "What are you reading, Mom?" "The story of Ruth and Naomi," I replied, closing the book gently so as not to wake Emma, who had dozed off against my shoulder. Emma asked me to tell her a story about families who love each other no matter what. David's eyes grew bright. "You used to read me that story when I was her age. You always liked the part where Ruth says, 'Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people.'" I remember. He sat down in the chair across from us, studying my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A big one." "David?" "No, let me say this. I've been a coward. I let Kelly's family dictate how we treated you because it was easier than standing up to them. I convinced myself that their way was modern and progressive, that your faith was somehow outdated or harmful. But the truth is, I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Ashamed that I stopped believing the way you do. Ashamed that I couldn't live up to the example you and Dad set. Ashamed that I chose comfort over character." His voice broke slightly. "It was easier to make you the problem than to admit I'd lost something precious." I shifted carefully so as not to wake Emma and reached for my son's hand. "Sweetheart, you don't have to believe everything I believe. Faith isn't something you inherit like eye color. It's something you choose, every day, for yourself. But I treated you like your faith was dangerous. Because someone convinced you it was. But look around, David. Look at your children. Are they damaged by hearing Bible stories? Are they traumatized by learning to say grace? Are they suffering because their grandmother loves them and prays for them?" He glanced down at Emma, sleeping peacefully against my arm, her face serene and content. "No, they're not." Then maybe the problem was never my faith. Maybe the problem was fear. Fear that loving me meant choosing sides. Fear that accepting my beliefs meant rejecting Kelly's family. Fear that there wasn't room in your life for all of us. "Is there?" he asked quietly. "Room for all of us?" I thought about Patricia's threats, Kelly's struggles, the weeks of pain and isolation we'd all endured. There's room for everyone who chooses love over control, David. There's room for everyone who wants to build bridges instead of walls. That evening, something unprecedented happened. Kelly knocked on my bedroom door and asked if I wanted to join them for a movie night. Not as an afterthought or obligation, but as a genuine invitation. We watched an old musical, The Sound of Music, and I found myself laughing at Kelly's commentary, enjoying her sharp wit and intelligence in a way I'd never allowed myself before. When Emma climbed into my lap during the intermission, Kelly didn't object. When Michael asked me to sing along to Edelweiss, she actually smiled. "You have a beautiful voice, Charlotte," she said during the credits. "I never knew you could sing like that." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied gently. "But maybe there's time to learn." Friday brought the biggest surprise of all. David came home from work carrying flowers. Not grocery store flowers, but the kind from an actual florist, arranged with care and thought. "These are for you, Mom," he said, presenting them with a sheepish smile. "I realized I haven't bought you flowers since Dad's funeral. That's 3 years of Mother's Days, birthdays, just because days that I missed." The bouquet was beautiful. White roses mixed with baby's breath and eucalyptus. Simple and elegant and completely unexpected. "They're lovely, sweetheart. What's the occasion?" "The occasion is that I almost lost my mother because I forgot what she meant to me. The occasion is that I want to be the son you raised me to be, not the stranger I've become." Kelly appeared behind him, holding a wrapped package. "We have something else for you," she said, her voice slightly nervous. "It's not much, but..." I unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a beautiful picture frame. Inside was a new family photo, one that included me. It had been taken secretly during our movie night, showing all of us laughing on the couch. Emma on my lap, Michael leaning against David, Kelly's hand resting on my shoulder. "When did you take this?" "Last night," Kelly admitted. David set up his phone to take automatic pictures. We thought maybe it was time we had some family photos that showed the whole family. I stared at the image, seeing not just 5 people on a couch, but a family that had found its way back to love. We all looked happy, relaxed, like we belonged together. "There's something else," David said, pulling out an official-looking document. "I called Sunset Gardens and got our deposit back, all of it. And I called Patricia and told her that if she ever contacted CPS again or spread rumors about you, she'd be hearing from our lawyer." "Our lawyer?" "Thomas Wells. I hired him to represent our family's interests. All of our family's interests, including yours." Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of children's laughter and the smell of pancakes cooking downstairs. But this time, I wasn't the one making breakfast. Kelly was in the kitchen, attempting to recreate my recipe while Emma and Michael helped by making more mess than assistance. "Grandma Charlotte," Michael called when he saw me. "Mommy is making your pancakes, but they don't look right." Kelly looked up from the stove, flour in her hair and batter on her apron, laughing despite her culinary struggles. "I thought maybe you could teach me," she said. "The kids have been asking for Grandma's pancakes all week." I tied on my own apron and moved to stand beside her at the stove. "The secret is not overmixing the batter," I said, taking the spoon from her hands. "Let it be a little lumpy. Perfection isn't always better." As we cooked together, Kelly asked questions, not just about pancakes, but about everything. What was it like raising David as a single mother during Robert's deployments? How had I managed to stay strong during his father's illness? What did my faith actually teach about love and forgiveness? "I spent so much time being afraid of your religion that I never bothered to understand it," she admitted as we flipped pancakes side by side. "My family taught me that religious people were judgmental and narrow-minded. But you're not like that at all. Faith, at its best, makes us more loving, not less," I said. "It teaches us to see the divine in every person, to forgive when forgiveness seems impossible, to hope when hope seems foolish." "Is that how you forgave us? For how we treated you?" I turned to look at her, really look at her. This young woman who'd been so afraid of being judged that she'd forgotten how to love without conditions. "Kelly, I didn't forgive you because my religion required it. I forgave you because holding on to anger would have poisoned my heart and prevented us from having mornings like this one." Sunday morning arrived with Texas sunshine streaming through windows that no longer felt like barriers. For the first time in 3 years, David knocked on my door wearing a suit instead of golf clothes. "Mom," he said, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers, "would you like to go to church with us this morning? As a family?" I looked past him to see Kelly in a simple blue dress, helping Emma with her shoes while Michael tried unsuccessfully to comb his own hair. "Are you sure?" I asked, not daring to hope too much. "We're sure," Kelly said, appearing in the doorway. "I've been thinking about what you said about faith making us more loving. I'd like to see what that looks like." At First Baptist Church of Austin, Pastor Williams nearly fell off the pulpit when he saw our family walk in together. The congregation that had watched me sit alone for months suddenly saw me surrounded by my children and grandchildren, all of us together in the same pew. During the service, when we stood to sing Amazing Grace, I heard David's voice join mine on the familiar words. Kelly didn't sing, but she listened with an openness I'd never seen before. Emma and Michael fidgeted but stayed close, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. After church, as we walked to the car together, Emma tugged on my dress. "Grandma Charlotte, are you happy now?" I knelt down to her level, this precious child who'd noticed when I was sad and celebrated when I found joy again. "Yes, sweetheart. Grandma is very happy now." "Good," she said matter-of-factly. "Mommy said we almost lost you, but we found you again." Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. As we drove home together, all of us in the same car for the first time in years, I thought about the verse that had sustained me through the darkest weeks. "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." But sometimes, I realized, God's way of taking us up is teaching other people how to love us better. Sometimes redemption comes not through escape, but through the patient work of rebuilding what was broken. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary mornings when families remember how to choose love over fear. And sometimes, the most powerful prayer isn't asking God to change our circumstances, but asking Him to give us the strength to change ourselves into people worthy of the love we seek. 6 months later, I sat in the same living room where Kelly had once forbidden me from reading my Bible, but everything had changed. The morning sun streamed through windows that Kelly and I had chosen new curtains for together, soft yellow ones that let in more light, and somehow made the whole house feel more welcoming. Emma was curled up beside me, her small finger tracing the words in my Bible as I read aloud from Proverbs. "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." "What does that mean, Grandma Charlotte?" she asked, looking up with those bright, curious eyes that missed nothing. "It means that when we teach children about love and kindness and faith, those lessons stay with them their whole lives, even when they grow up and have to make their own choices. Like how you taught Daddy." "Exactly like that, sweetheart." Kelly appeared in the doorway, no longer the tense, defensive woman who had once seen my faith as a threat. These days, she often joined our morning reading time, bringing her coffee and listening with an open heart to stories that had once frightened her. "Charlotte, the ladies from your Bible study are here," she announced with a smile. "Should I tell them you'll be right out?" 3 months ago, I had started hosting a weekly Bible study in our living room. When I'd first suggested it, I'd expected resistance, but David had surprised me by building a small bookshelf for Bibles and study guides, and Kelly had offered to provide refreshments. "Mrs. Chen from next door brought homemade cookies," Kelly added, "and she wanted me to tell you that her granddaughter is visiting from college and would love to join your group if that's okay." "Of course it's okay," I said, gently closing my Bible. "The more hearts we can touch, the better." Emma scrambled off the couch. "Can I help serve the cookies, Mommy?" "After you wash your hands," Kelly replied, ruffling her daughter's hair with the easy affection that had returned to our household like spring after a long winter. As I made my way to greet my guests, I passed the hallway wall that had been transformed into what Kelly called our family gallery. Where once there had been photos that excluded me, now hung a collection of images that told the story of our healing. Emma and me baking cookies, Michael helping me plant flowers in the garden, all of us at David's promotion dinner, family vacations we'd taken together. But my favorite photo was from last month's Mother's Day. David had insisted on taking me to brunch at the fanciest restaurant in Austin, and the picture showed all 5 of us dressed in our Sunday best, laughing over some joke Michael had told. I kept a copy in my Bible as a bookmark, a reminder of how far we'd traveled from those dark days when I'd wondered if my family would be happier without me. The Bible study that morning was particularly meaningful. We were discussing forgiveness, not the easy kind, but the hard kind that requires us to choose love over hurt repeatedly until the choice becomes natural. Margaret Hayes, my dear friend who had become a regular attendee, shared how she'd reconciled with her own estranged daughter after years of silence. "Sometimes," Margaret said, looking directly at me, "we have to be willing to fight for our families, even when fighting feels unloving. Sometimes the most Christian thing we can do is refuse to be treated unchristianly." The other ladies nodded in understanding. Word had spread through our church community about the transformation in our household, and I'd been approached by several women facing similar struggles with family members who seemed embarrassed by their faith. My story had become a source of hope for others who felt caught between loving their families and honoring their beliefs. After the study ended and our guests had left, I found Kelly in the kitchen, cleaning up the coffee cups and cookie plates without being asked. This simple act of service would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "How was your study?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Wonderful." Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, Sarah, asked some really thoughtful questions about faith and doubt. "I think she might become a regular." Kelly smiled. "You have a gift for making people feel safe to ask questions. I should know." It was true. Over the past months, Kelly had begun asking me about everything from prayer to biblical history to how faith intersected with daily life. She'd even started reading a few Bible verses on her own, not because she felt pressured, but because her curiosity had been awakened. "Speaking of questions," Kelly said, her tone becoming more serious, "David and I wanted to talk to you about something. My heart skipped a beat. Despite all our progress, I still sometimes feared backsliding, still worried that this newfound harmony was too fragile to last. What is it, dear? We've been thinking about Emma and Michael's education. David and I would like to enroll them in a Christian school, not because we're trying to force religion on them, but because we want them to understand that faith and learning can coexist. That being smart doesn't mean you can't also be spiritual. I sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was saying. Kelly, are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. Charlotte, look at what faith has done for our family. Look at how your example taught us about real love, real forgiveness, real strength. I want my children to have that foundation, even if they choose different paths when they're older. Through the kitchen window, I could see David in the backyard, pushing Michael on the swing set, while Emma chased butterflies around the flower garden we'd planted together. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully domestic, that it took my breath away. There's something else, Kelly continued. My mother called yesterday. I tensed automatically, old habits of fear dying hard. She wanted to apologize. To you. Directly. This was the last thing I'd expected to hear. Patricia had maintained radio silence since David's ultimatum months ago, and I'd assumed she'd written us all off as lost causes. She's been in therapy, Kelly explained, working through some issues about control and fear. Her therapist helped her understand that her behavior toward you came from her own anxiety about religion, not from any actual threat you posed to the children. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I don't need an apology, Kelly. I just need the accusations to stop. They have stopped. Completely. In fact, she asked if she could come for a visit next month. She wants to meet the woman she misjudged so badly. The doorbell rang before I could respond, and Emma came running through the house shouting, "Someone's here! Someone's here!" Through the front window, I could see Thomas Wells on the porch, carrying a thick manila envelope and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "Charlotte," he said when Kelly opened the door, "I have something that's going to make your day." He handed me the envelope with the ceremony of someone delivering a prize. The state of Texas has officially dismissed the CPS investigation. Not only that, but they've flagged Patricia Brennan's complaint as unfounded and malicious. If she ever tries to make false reports again about anyone, they'll pursue charges against her. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an official letter on Texas Department of Family Services letterhead, stating in formal language what Thomas had just explained in plain English. But there was more. A commendation letter recognizing my positive influence on the minor children in question, and noting that the investigating social worker had observed a loving, stable household environment with appropriate religious education. "There's one more thing," Thomas said with a grin. "The caseworker, Maria Rodriguez, asked me to tell you that she's looking for a church home for her own family. Apparently, your testimony about faith and family made quite an impression on her." That evening, as I tucked Emma and Michael into their beds, Emma asked me the question that had started this whole journey. "Grandma Charlotte, will you read me a Bible story?" "Of course, sweetheart. Which one would you like to hear?" "The one about the lady who was sad but then became happy again." I smiled, knowing exactly which story she meant. That would be the story of Hannah, who prayed for a baby for many years before God blessed her with Samuel. "No," Emma said with the certainty of a 6-year-old who knows her own mind. "I mean the story about you." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean, honey?" "The story about how you were sad because people said you couldn't read your Bible, but then God helped everyone remember how to love each other again." Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. That's a beautiful way to tell that story, Emma. Will you write it down someday, so other grandmas who are sad can read it and know that God still loves them? I kissed her forehead and tucked her blanket around her small shoulders. "Maybe I will, sweetheart. Maybe I will." Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen, beginning to write the story Emma had asked for. Not just the story of the past 6 months, but the larger story of how God works through brokenness to create something beautiful. How families can lose their way and find it again. How faith can be a bridge instead of a wall. As I wrote, David appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, but his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. "Writing your memoirs, Mom," Writing Emma's story, I corrected. The one about the grandma who learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be treated unlovingly. He sat down across from me, reading over what I'd written. That's a good story. A true story. It's not finished yet, I said, looking up at my son. This good man who'd lost his way for a while but found his way back to love. The best stories never really end. They just become part of the larger story that God is writing with all our lives. Through the kitchen window, I could see the moon rising over Austin, casting silver light on the garden where tomorrow Emma and Michael would help me plant new flowers. Somewhere in the house, Kelly was reading in bed, occasionally calling out questions about Bible verses she didn't understand. This was my life now. Not perfect, but whole. Not without challenges, but filled with hope. I thought about that terrible morning 6 months ago when Kelly had forbidden me from reading my Bible in front of the children. How devastated I'd felt. How alone. How convinced that my family would be happier without me. Now Emma asked for Bible stories every night. Michael prayed over his meals with enthusiasm that made everyone smile. Kelly asked thoughtful questions about faith and doubt. David had rediscovered the peace that comes from knowing your mother's love is unconditional. And I had learned that sometimes God's answer to our prayers doesn't look like escape from our circumstances. Sometimes it looks like the strength to change our circumstances. Sometimes the miracle isn't being rescued from our families, but teaching our families how to love us better. As I closed my notebook and prepared for bed, I whispered the prayer that had become my nightly ritual. Thank you, Lord, for teaching me that faith isn't something to be hidden or ashamed of. Thank you for showing me that love sometimes requires courage. Thank you for reminding me that I am never truly alone, even in my darkest moments. And thank you for families that can be broken and healed, lost and found, over and over again, because that's how grace works. Amen. Outside my window, Austin slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. Inside my home, our home, love had learned to live alongside faith, and fear had given way to acceptance. This is what redemption looks like. Not a dramatic rescue, but the quiet, daily choice to keep loving, keep believing, keep hoping until love wins. And in our house, love had finally won. Have you ever lived through something like this? Or known someone who found strength through faith during family struggles? How did prayer and trust in God help you or them get through the hardest times? If this story touched your heart, please share it in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to this channel so this message can reach someone who needs to hear it today. May God bless everyone who's been through something like this. In Jesus' name, amen.